It is 10:27. We'd like you to make your way into the sanctuary for parables. Today, Pastor Amy will be talking to Dixie Philippe.
Yay! Yay, Dixie!
You have 2 minutes. Oh, this is really good. Yeah, this is good. Yeah. You have 2 minutes to make it into parables. Dixie starts on time and she finishes on time.
Actually, that one does sound pretty good. Yeah. Maybe we'll swap the other one out and see what happens with it.
The other one.
That one's a little, I don't know, that one's a little, might have run against the wall a couple times, you know?
Welcome, everyone. Is my mic working? Yeah, okay. I think, well, no, Justin's back there, so he'll help us if we need it. Y'all turn around and say hi to Justin. Justin is the magic behind all the sound improvements that we've had lately. So thank Justin for all of his hard work. Yeah. You might not know that he's doing it, but you'll know it if he's not, right? So we're really, really grateful to him.
Is this working?
Let's check.
Yes.
Let's check Dixie's mic.
Checking. Yeah. You can hear me.
Good. Yay. So I am thrilled to be with Dixie Philippe today for Parables. Dixie, could I start by telling them about our email exchange when I ask you to do this? Can I tell them?
Go ahead.
She said, well, I'm a little quiet, but I believe I can do this. And I said, I know you can, and I know you have a great story to tell, as you all do. So thank you for your willingness to share your stories, and thank you for participating in person and online. And so Dixie, I know we have a couple of stories we want to be sure we absolutely get to, but let's start with where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Okay.
And hold the mic. Don't be afraid of it. It's okay. You hold it
Okay.
right up to your face.
All
and
right.
Justin will help you.
Well, my parents were born in Wyoming, and they met when they knew each other all their lives. It was a very, very small town, Manville, probably population about 300 people. But it's kind of there's the oil fields nearby and lots of ranches, and that's kind of what the whole place consists of. Anyway, my parents met when they were just in grade school, and they knew each other all their lives. And when they were in their mid-20s, they married. And then after a couple of years, I came along. And then a few years later, I had two brothers. My two brothers and I think I was just enough older than they that they used to fight quite a bit. But I was talking to my brother this morning, and I said, I don't think that in all the time that we've been together, all these many, many years, that you and I have ever had words or fought in any sort of way. He said, no, I was always fighting with our brother Dan. I said, so I was really blessed to have a wonderful family, especially my mother. She was an orphan, and she was raised by her grandparents in Wyoming. She was a twin, and her brother was raised by the other set of grandparents in Colorado, and they didn't see each other until they were teenagers, and they really never knew each other very well. And but my mother was to me, the most perfect human being I've ever met. I think like she was just an angel. And my father was rather difficult, so she was really the rock of our lives, I think.
Wow. So did you grow up then in Wyoming, or
No,
did you move around a bit?
My father worked in the oil fields there, and when I was 6, somebody told him about how to get rich in Oregon. They were growing Easter lilies. The only place in the world besides Japan, supposedly, that grew Easter lilies on the coast. And never mind, he didn't know anything about farming. He sold everything, and off we went to Oregon. And I remember the day we arrived, it was raining. It was a warm rain. It was so unusual because I was used to Wyoming cold. And there was the ocean there, and everything was green. And I just loved it. And we stayed there for the next 12 years until I was a senior in high school.
Okay, so Wyoming and then Oregon.
Yes, then back to Wyoming.
And then back to Wyoming. Okay, so tell us about that transition.
Well, my father got really enthusiastic about uranium. There was uranium in the 2 or 3 counties around where we were from. And so we went back in March. It was horrible weather. It was unbelievable because we weren't used to that. And the snow was actually up to the second-story windows, the drifts. And we arrived, and here we were, and Dad was going to start drilling, but of course it was not the weather for that. But he stayed there 2 years trying to, he drilled for uranium for himself and for other people, but it was a kind of a losing thing. I was a senior when we moved there, and I went to college in Nebraska for the next 2 years, and then my father took out bankruptcy. So that was a real blow to our family, and we moved back. He got his old job back in Oregon. He worked for the water company, so we were back in Oregon.
Okay. And so what happened after Nebraska? You went to college for a couple of years. What happened next?
Well, that's when my dad took out the bankruptcy, and we moved back to Oregon. And it was I was a pre-med. I was positive that I was going to be a doctor. In the school, in the college I went to, there was only one other woman who was a pre-med. She was from Iran. And the scholarships, this really seems unfair now. I would have protested now, but at that time, there were only 2 scholarships for pre-med, and they both went to men. Very unfair, but we didn't really realize how unfair that was. But anyhow, I went back. My parents, we all moved back to Oregon again, and I was ready to go to the University of Oregon. I had my suitcase by the door, and I was waiting for these people to pick me up who were taking their daughter to university. And I saw my mother nervously writing a check. And in my heart, I didn't think she had that much money. And so I said, Mom, maybe I should wait for another year or something to go. Oh, no, dear. She says, I want you to go. And she was writing this check. And I said, you know, Mom, I think I better stay home. And she said, well, dear, it probably would be best. So I didn't get back. And I got a job, and I tried to help my parents pay off all these debts they had. And, of course, I didn't have a whole lot of skills. I was like an assistant bookkeeper. And several years went by, and finally, I sort of gave up the idea of going back to school.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Man, it's already a fascinating story, isn't it? Okay, so we're talking about your history. We're talking about your first family, your family of origin. Can you tell me how that evolved into your adult family?
Yes, well, I will say that my parents they always took us to Sunday school and church, and we, no matter where we were, we always went to church, and we always took part. I remember I taught Vacation Bible School, various things like that when I was young. And so I think that helped me a lot to have parents who were Christians, really.
What faith tradition, Dixie?
Pardon?
What faith tradition?
Well, we were in the small town. The one town there was only the Congregational Church, and the other town there was the Baptist Church. Mm-hmm. And we went to Presbyterian. Wherever we were, and there was a church. We were in these small towns. There weren't too many churches.
Okay, good. So tell
Protestant, I guess you'd say.
Protestant churches. Yeah, good clarification. So how did you meet your husband? How did you move into the next phase of life?
Well, I remember my husband from when I was in grade school, but he was enough older than I. He didn't remember me at all. But we met at a talent show. He was the judge for this talent show thing, and we met, and we dated for a couple of years, and then we were married. And he had just sold his business, and he was from Connecticut, and his parents were from Connecticut. And so since he just sold his business and he was kind of interested in, he wanted me to see Connecticut and New York and maybe go to Cape Cod. So we did all of that and was having a wonderful vacation. And then he and his mother and father were with us. And he and his father were looking at various motels. We were on Cape Cod. Now, this was in September. There's nothing much going on after Labor Day on Cape Cod. And my husband and his father looked at like 3 different motels, and I was just sitting in the car with my mother-in-law, and they came out and said, well, we just bought this motel. My husband was rather impetuous, I have to say. It was news to me. So we were on Cape Cod for about 4 years, but unfortunately, we were in a bad location. Even though it was Cape Cod, people felt that, and it was Buzzards Bay was the name of the town. They felt they weren't in Cape Cod until they went across the bridge. There was these 2 canals, and once it was Buzzards Bay on both sides. You might say we were on the wrong side of the bridge. And because people didn't really feel that we were on Cape Cod, the motel really didn't get a lot of business until the whole Cape filled up, and then they would come over the bridge and stay in the motels that were on the wrong side of the bridge. So we finally realized that we'd be better off if we would close in the winter. And so we decided to go home and see our parents and friends, home being Oregon. my husband's best friend had just sold his grocery store. He was 30 years old. And he and my husband decided to maybe get a business together. And they did. They bought this restaurant and cocktail lounge in this small town in California, 14 miles from the Oregon border. And they bought it in March. And then it was time for me to go back and run the motel because we still hadn't sold it. So his parents and I went back to Massachusetts to run the motel. I don't know if you want me to keep on with this.
I'm interested. Are y'all
Long
interested?
story.
We're hooked, Dixie. We're hooked. Keep going.
It's like a travel log. So my husband's parents went back with me to the motel. And 2 months later, my husband's partner, who was 30 years old, had some sort of a problem with his heart and died almost instantly. So my husband was left running this motel, the restaurant and bar by himself. It was really stressful. It was because the town was so isolated. It had these 2 large mills, but it had very little people. Not many people lived there. There was very poor housing. There was only a grocery store, my husband's restaurant and bar, and post office, and that was just about it. So it was an extremely isolated place. But anyway, I was back in Massachusetts with my in-laws, and my father-in-law had a stroke and died. So it was just 2 tragedies, one right after the other. And so then I was left running the motel by myself, which was really difficult for me.
Yeah.
And it was,
I can imagine.
yeah, it was bad. But anyway, eventually we did sell the motel, and I got, the next year, it was about time for me to go back to Massachusetts again, but we sold it, so that was just wonderful. So,
Right.
want me to just keep going on?
Well,
You got
yes,
some questions?
I want to make sure that we talk about those 2 stories that you mentioned, and I'm not sure exactly when they took place in relation
Yeah,
to
it was-
all of this. So let's move to those because we want to be sure that people hear them.
Okay, we just arrived on Cape Cod. It was late October, and Hyannis, where President-elect Kennedy lived, was 15 miles away. So my husband and his friend Lino decided to leave me at the motel running it, and they would go and hear President Kennedy President-elect Kennedy give his acceptance speech. He had Oregon license on our car, and my husband had Oregon driver's license, and he had, years before, he used to be carrying quite a bit of money back and forth in the evenings after his businesses closed, and there was no bank in our town. So the sheriff told my husband he should get a permit to carry a gun. So he had an Oregon permit. He honestly had forgotten he had that gun under the seat of the car, but he did have this permit. So when the police stopped him, and they asked, I don't know if they searched a car or if they asked my husband, I think they asked him, do you have a firearm? And he said, yes, but I have a permit. And they said, Mr., Oregon permits don't work in Massachusetts, so we're arresting you. They said, you could be an assassin. We don't know what you're doing here. He tried to explain, but they took them both to the jail in Hyannis, and they interrogated them for several hours. And they finally decided, oh, maybe these guys are okay, so they let Lino, my husband's friend, drive the car back to Buzzards Bay, which was only 15 miles away, as I said. But he got there. They had rotaries. I know we have 1 or 2 here now, but they were real confusing to my husband's friend Lino. And he went the wrong direction, and he went all the way to Provincetown, 60 miles away. That was the end of the Cape. And then he realized, oh, this is all wrong. So he finally got his way back to Buzzards Bay and found me, and we got the bail money and went and bailed my husband out. But my husband said, meanwhile, because so many hours, they kept saying, well, where's your buddy? And they sort of interrogated him again, thinking that, this guy left on you, and there's something important maybe here. But anyway, we bailed him out.
Okay, wait, let's just stop for a second. Your husband was thought to be a potential assassin
Yes.
to President-elect John F. Kennedy.
Yes, and then we...
Did y'all catch that?
Yeah, and then we said later, if only the Dallas police would have been so vigilant as these Massachusetts police were.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
Dixie, that is quite a story, and that's just one.
Yes, and then I have another Kennedy story. Sometime many years later, we were in Portland, Oregon, and we were staying at this hotel, and we didn't realize that Robert Kennedy was going to be giving a speech there that evening. And so we were really excited about seeing him. And we were, since we were staying there, we were first in, and we kept getting pushed further and further up until we just, people kept arriving until we were just, Bobby was on stage with Ethel and some other folks, but it was a low stage. But anyway, we kept getting pushed up to the stage, and I was sort of squished there, and this man, I don't know who he was, and he said, I'm going to lift you up on the stage. You're getting crushed. And I said, oh, well, I don't think I better get on the stage with Bobby and the Kennedys. And first thing I knew, I was up there with them. And they said hello. And it was very strange being up there. I was petrified, really. And the sad thing was, he had the very next week, he was assassinated in Los Angeles. And I thought, the security was so poor in Portland that I was up on the stage with him. And there, and then he goes to Los Angeles, and it was equally poor. And he was murdered, really. So that's my two Kennedy stories.
Aren't they amazing stories? in an amazing life. I mean, the way you tell your story is very compelling, Dixie. And I want to make sure people have a chance to ask you questions, but I also want you to tell the story, if you would, about how you came to Morning Star, because that's a meaningful story as well. What was going on in that time of your life, and how did you become part of the community?
Yes. Well, as I said, my husband was always prone to buying things. And we came over to visit an acquaintance here. We were in Tucson for a little while. And we came over here, and we were visiting with him, and then we started home. And my husband just loved to look at homes. He always, no matter where we were, he's always looking at houses. And he looked at about 3 houses, and he ended up buying a house where I am now. He said, oh, I think we'll buy this house. And the realtor was really thrilled.
Which is just over there. I mean, it's not far from where we are in this very moment.
Yes, and I could see this church from our window. But I had always gone to a different church, the Presbyterian Church, and I went there. I guess there were several here, 3 or something. But my husband and I went, and it wasn't quite what we were looking for. And he looked out the front window, and he said, well, what's wrong with that church down there? And I said, I don't know. I've never gone to a Methodist church. And he said, well, let's try it. And so we tried it, and we thought it was the place for us. And do you want me to talk about my husband's death?
If you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah. So my husband had gotten his nose broken when he was in high school playing basketball. Somebody came down and broke his nose unintentionally. But over the years, he always had problems with it. And as he got older, he was having problems breathing. And so I said to him, why don't you go and see an ear, nose, and throat doctor? I'm sure that there's something that could help you. And he did, and he made an appointment to have this surgery. It was supposedly probably no more than 20 minutes, they said. Just prior to that, I had donated my kidney to my brother who lived in Oregon. And the kidney was starting to fail, and so the kidney doctor had called me and said, I'm making an appointment for you here, and I want you to go over and we want to find out what's happening with your kidney, and maybe we can help your brother's kidney. And that was failing. And it happened to be at the very same time that my husband had made the appointment to have this little surgery on his nose. And I said, I'm going to cancel my appointment. And he said, no, it's really important. Your brother, they need to find out what's happening, and maybe you just go over there. It's such a small surgery, and you go over there, and then you come over, and I'll be in the recovery room, I'm sure. And so I had just sat down in the doctor's office, and my phone rang, and the hospital told me, come back immediately. They didn't say anything more. I hung up, and I ran across. It was only across the street, and I ran across the street, and then they put me into one of those little rooms that they put people in it had a window, and I was standing there anxiously looking out that window into the hall, and I saw the anesthesiologist and the surgeon coming down the hallway, and the surgeon was crying. He's actually wiping tears from his eyes. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible, I'm afraid. And sure enough, they came and they both took hold of my hands, and they told me that he was in the recovery room laughing and talking to them and talking to the staff. And then he said he had this pain and he died. So at any rate, the church was so wonderful to me. They went to Pat Keever went to the, when they brought me home from the hospital, she was standing in the yard waiting for me. Somehow, I guess I had told them that I attended this church, and I think John must have called Pat, and she was waiting for me. She comforted me and tried to help me best she could. She asked me to stay overnight at her house, which I just wanted to be alone, really. By that time, it was so shocking. And so when the day of the funeral, I didn't have it here at the church. I had it at the mortuary. I was so amazed. People brought food. People from this church brought food to my house. Several people came to the memorial service. They even went as far as to go to the cemetery. I thought, oh, wow, this is the best church. And I said that evening, as long as I live in Las Cruces, I'm always going to go to Morning Star Methodist Church. So that's pretty much the story of my life here.
Thank you for sharing that piece. You hadn't been a part of Morning Star for very long,
No, not too
had
long.
you, when your husband died? And
No.
the rest of this story that I don't think Dixie will tell is that she is the one who will do anything for anyone now.
Oh, no. That's not true.
It's behind the scenes, and so you probably don't see it, but she will, and she does. And
Oh,
and Dixie,
thank you so much.
Gosh, we appreciate you.
Oh, well, thank you.
And your spirit. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, do you have anything else you'd like to say before I ask if they have questions?
Well, I don't think I mentioned, did I mention that we took care of 2 foster children?
No, please do.
Yes.
Please do.
My husband, when he had the restaurant and bar, he didn't think that it was any place for me to be, and it wasn't of interest to me particularly. And so I had a lot of time at home, and I got the idea of taking care of foster children. And first off, they gave us a boy who was 14. His name was Michael, and he lived with us for a year. He had a lot of problems, but the different states have different criteria, and their criteria was to get the child back with his parents, and not, even though the parents may not be exactly perfect, that was their thought. So after a year, he went back with his parents, and the next time we heard from him, we saw in the our local newspaper that he was in jail, and he had been attacked by other people in jail. He's somewhat very slight, young, almost feminine person, and they had attacked him. And so we went down to the jail and visited with him, and we talked with the judge, and so he let us bail him out. So that was the last time that I ever got to see Michael. And the other little guy that we had, he was 6 years old. His name was also Michael, and he came from a very abusive family also, more so than the other boy, really. But we had him for a year, and then the powers to be decided he should go back with his parents. And he had years later, I saw him. In fact, he came and borrowed some things from us, and it was 5:30 in the morning. My husband had just left to go fishing, and the doorbell rang, and I looked out, and it was this person I didn't really recognize, and then I realized it was this Michael. And he said he was in all kinds of trouble, but he had a lot of money some money coming in. In a few days, could he borrow $160? I was kind of nervous to think that he even thought I had that much money laying around, but I left him standing at the door, and I went and I got the $160 and gave it to him. Of course, he never came back, and I never saw him again. So my experience as a foster parent was really heartbreaking, I thought. We tried so hard, but I think the children, many of them, have such terrible lives, and it just crosses over into the rest of their lives.
But you made a difference as you could.
I did.
did.
We tried, and I really appreciated my husband going along with some of the ideas I had because
Well, it sounds like you went along with his ideas. So
that's true. It was his turn to go along with mine.
that's right. That's right. Any thoughts or questions for Dixie? Pat Keever. Okay.
Yeah. That is why I volunteered with them because
Okay. Dixie, let me repeat that for our friends at home. So Pat is saying that these are just a few of the amazing stories that Dixie has to tell, but also that from your experience as a foster parent, you also got involved with CASA here in Las Cruces, and you've served as a hospice volunteer too.
yes, I was with hospice back on the coast. We helped some friends and I. We sort of helped start the hospice there. And we were very short-staffed, so we found ourselves extremely busy, staying overnight with people, going to the hospital. But it was very rewarding. I don't
It's beautiful.
regret a moment.
Beautiful. We have a baptism coming up at 11:15, so we do need to get ready for that. But I want one last comment. Yes, Alejandra.
I imagine you had to meet some insane people when you were working in a motel. Do you have like a guest story that you can remember more clearly?
Do you have a crazy motel guest story?
No, the only crazy thing was we didn't have enough guests.
Okay, Ellen, and then Fran. Okay. Yes. For the
thank you. The reason I was interested so much in dyslexia, and I still am, both of my brothers were dyslexic, but we didn't know what it was in those days.
Sure.
And I used to try to help them read, and every summer I would get out little books and go out in the yard, and I'd do phonics. I'd go, book. And by the time I got to about G, they ran away from me. And I could never understand why I couldn't help them learn to read. And then later on, when I learned about dyslexia, I thought, oh, that was it. And so that's my interest in dyslexia.
That's a beautiful story, too. And so for those of you who didn't hear, she's been very involved with the Dyslexia Institute since its beginning here in Las Cruces. And then Fran.
Tell the story about you were trying to decide, you and your husband trying to decide whether to live in the house you have here in Las Cruces and a house in Arizona. So quickly the story about how you ended up with this one.
Oh,
The story about how you ended up with your house.
well, we had this place in Arizona, and as I said, my husband sort of brought this place without even really consulting me much. And we realized we didn't want two places, and so we tried to sell we decided to put both places for sale, and whichever one sold first, we would go that way. And so I went down to Tucson or Green Valley to help the realtor, because even though we had a realtor, he didn't show the house very often. So every single day for almost a year, practically every day, I had open house. And that's had to be really neat and tidy when you have open house every day. But yes, one day somebody came by. My husband had scolded me. He said, "You didn't bring in the real estate signs that you put down at the end of the road." And so I was up there, I was just ready to take the sign down, and I saw this car stopped slowly, and they looked and they drove. I drove right behind them. They went into our house. They went in there, and in just a few minutes, they offered us full price, and we sold. So I came here.
Oh, another great story. We're going to have Dixie back so she can tell some more of those stories that we didn't get to today.
That's more than enough.
Can you thank Dixie for her time? Can you thank Dixie? Thank you so much.
Well, thank
Yes,
you.
yes,
Thank you for listening to my crazy stories. I'm not quite as crazy as my stories.
We're glad you're here.
Thank
And
you.
Parables will continue next week. And if you haven't had a chance to tell your story yet and you'd like to, just let me know and we'll get you on the schedule. And church will start in 12 minutes. Thank you all so much.